taste it. That was the recipe. Big Mama stood at the stove with one hand on the pot and the other pointing at your mouth. And if you asked how much salt, she looked at you like you had lost your mind. Further down this countdown, one dish turned leftover biscuit dough into something people drove across town to eat. Number 8 is the one most kitchens pretended did not exist until the platter was empty. And the last dish on this list held every Sunday together for 40 years without a single written word. These 30 meals were never measured, never timed, and never taught in a classroom. The woman who made them carried every ratio in her hands. Hit subscribe because this list goes deep. Here are 30 dishes Big Mama made that nobody writes down anymore. Number 30, stewed tomatoes over rice. A can of whole tomatoes, a spoonful of sugar, salt, pepper, and a thick slice of butter dropped in at the end. Big Mama cooked it low until the tomatoes broke apart and turned into something closer to a sauce than a soup. She spooned it over white rice and called it supper. The sugar cut the acid just enough to make children eat it without complaint. Nobody in the family considered this a real recipe. It was too simple to bother naming. Grocery stores still sell canned tomatoes for less than $1, but the dish vanished because nobody thought to pass it along. It was too ordinary to seem worth remembering, and that is exactly why it disappeared. Number 29, fried salt pork with red-eye gravy. A slab of salt pork sliced thin and fried in its own rendered fat until the edges curled and browned and went crisp enough to snap between your teeth. Big Mama poured black coffee into the hot skillet after the meat came out, and the coffee hit the grease and sizzled and turned into something dark and bitter and salty that no seasoning packet on any grocery shelf has ever reproduced. She spooned it over grits or split biscuits and set the plate down with the fried pork laid across the top. The salt pork itself cost almost nothing, and the coffee was already made. The gravy cost less than the match that lit the burner. Most modern kitchens do not even carry salt pork anymore, and the idea of pouring leftover coffee into a hot skillet full of grease sounds like a mistake to anyone who did not grow up watching it happen every Saturday morning. But the women who made it never questioned the method. They questioned the people who stopped. Number 28, blackberry dumpling cobbler. Wild blackberries picked from the fence line behind the house, sweetened with sugar and dropped into a cast iron skillet with strips of dough torn by hand. Big Mama never rolled the dough out. She tore pieces and laid them across the top so the juice bubbled through the gaps. The berries stained everything they touched, and nobody cared. Children ate it straight from the skillet with a spoon, and the woman who made it never once called it a cobbler. She just said she made something sweet. The blackberries grew back every summer, whether anybody tended them or not, and the cobbler was as reliable as the season that produced it. Number 27, pepper vinegar greens. Collard greens cooked all day with a piece of smoked meat, then hit at the table with homemade pepper vinegar from a bottle that never got washed out, just refilled. Big Mama kept that bottle on the stove for years. The peppers sat in the vinegar until they turned soft and pale, and every refill added another layer of heat. That bottle was the seasoning. The greens were just the vehicle. Some of those bottles outlasted the women who started them, and the families who inherited them kept filling them out of habit because the flavor was impossible to start over from scratch. Number 26, cornmeal mush. Yellow cornmeal stirred into boiling water with salt until it thickened into something you could stand a spoon in. Big Mama served it hot in a bowl with butter and molasses on a cold morning, or she let it set in a pan overnight, sliced it, and fried the slices in bacon grease for breakfast the next day. The same pot of mush fed a family 2 meals without complaint. Depression-era families across the South ate this 3 times a week, and most of their grandchildren have never heard the word mush used for food. It sounds like animal feed to ears that never woke up hungry. Number 25, egg. Custard pie, 5 eggs, sugar, a can of evaporated milk, vanilla, and a pinch of nutmeg beaten together and poured into a raw pie crust, then baked low until the center barely jiggled when Big Mama shook the pan with one hand and decided with her eyes whether it needed another minute or whether the carryover heat would finish the job. The filling set as it cooled on the counter, and by the time it reached the table, it cut clean and held its shape on the plate without slumping. This was the pie that showed up at every funeral, every homecoming, and every church anniversary, because it required no fruit, no chocolate, no whipped topping, and no decoration of any kind. The custard did all the talking. A woman who could make the filling set smooth without cracking the top or curdling the eggs had earned her reputation in that kitchen, and Big Mama never cracked one in her life. Number 24, smoked sausage and peppers over rice. Sliced smoked sausage, browned in a skillet with bell peppers and onions, cooked down until the peppers softened and the sausage had given up its fat into the pan. Big Mama spooned it over rice and let the grease settle into the grain. There was no recipe card for this. The proportions changed every time depending on what was in the house. A good night meant 2 sausages. A lean night meant 1, cut thinner. Either way, the plate looked full, and that was the skill nobody wrote a cookbook about. Number 23, fried green tomatoes. Tomatoes picked before they turned red, sliced thick, dredged in cornmeal and salt, and fried in a hot skillet until both sides went dark and crisp. Big Mama made these at the end of summer when the garden had more tomatoes than the family could eat ripe. The tartness of the green tomato against the crunch of the cornmeal was the whole point. No dipping sauce, no remoulade, just salt from the pan and the heat from the oil. The dish required a garden and a woman who paid attention to what was growing. And when both of those things disappeared from a household, the fried green tomatoes went with them. Number 22, molasses stacked cake. Thin layers of spiced dough stacked with cooked dried apples spread between them, then wrapped and left to sit for 2 or 3 days before anyone touched it. Big Mama made this for holidays, and the waiting was the recipe. The apple filling softened the layers until the whole thing held together like one solid piece that you sliced with a knife. Every family in Appalachian and Deep South communities had a version, and no two were alike because the number of layers depended on how many neighbors brought dough to the gathering. A 6-layer cake meant a small family. A 12-layer cake meant the whole road showed up. Number 21, chitterlings. No dish on this list carries the weight of history the way this one does, and none asks more of the cook. The hog intestines were among the few parts handed down to the enslaved, and the women who received them refused to be defeated by the gift. Cleaning them was a day-long labor of rinsing and stripping, and only after that came the long simmer with onion, pepper, and vinegar. The reward was a rich, tender, deeply seasoned plate that turned the lowest scrap into a holiday delicacy. For generations, it was the proudest dish at the Christmas table, the taste of triumph over scarcity itself. But few young cooks will spend a whole day cleaning what the store sells, pre-bagged and bland. A dish that fed survival through the worst of times is fading from the very tables it built. Number 20, skillet cornbread baked in lard, not the sweet, cakey kind sold in boxes today. Big Mama heated lard in a cast iron skillet until it smoked, poured in a batter made from white cornmeal, buttermilk, an egg, salt, and a pinch of baking soda and put the whole skillet in the oven. The hot lard gave the bottom a crust that cracked when you broke the bread apart, and the sound it made when you tore a piece off was as much a part of supper as the prayer before it. She never added sugar. Sugar and cornbread was a line she did not cross, and she was not quiet about it. If somebody brought a pan of sweet cornbread to a gathering, Big Mama ate everything else on the table and left that pan untouched, and everybody in the room understood what that meant. Every family reunion had at least one argument about whether cornbread should be sweet, and Big Mama settled it by putting her skillet on the table and saying nothing. The bread spoke for itself. It was dense enough to hold up under Potlikker without falling apart in the bowl, light enough to eat on its own with a glass of buttermilk, and good enough that nobody reached for the store-bought rolls sitting 2 feet away. That skillet was older than most of the people eating from it, and the seasoning on the iron was part of the recipe that no written instruction could carry. The women who baked cornbread this way did not think of lard as something to avoid. They thought of it as the thing that made the crust, and they were right. When the lard disappeared from kitchens in favor of vegetable shortening and cooking spray, the crust went with it, and no substitute has brought it back. The skillet sits in a cabinet now in most of those houses, and the cornbread comes from a box with sugar already mixed into the powder. Big Mama would not have called that cornbread at all. She would have called it cake, and she would not have meant it as a compliment. Here is something most cookbooks leave out. The women who cooked these meals did not follow recipes because they never had access to them. Cookbooks written before the 1960s almost never credited black cooks, and the ones that did stripped the techniques down to ingredient lists that missed the entire point. The measurement was a palm. The timer was a sound. The temperature was a look at the oil. When food historians talk about lost American cooking, they mean the cooking that was never recorded in the first place, not because it was simple, but because nobody with a printing press thought to ask the woman standing at the stove. Number 19, pear preserves, hard pears from the tree in the yard, peeled, quartered, and cooked in sugar syrup with a little lemon until they turned amber and translucent. Big Mama sealed them in jars and lined them up on a shelf in the pantry like a row of copper lanterns. Those jars lasted through winter and appeared on biscuits, on pound cake, and sometimes eaten straight from the jar with a spoon when nobody was looking. The pears had to be hard. Soft pears fell apart in the syrup. She picked them early on purpose and let the sugar do the work the sun had not finished. Number 18, backbone and rice. The backbone of the hog cut into pieces with a cleaver, seasoned with salt and pepper, and baked low until the meat pulled away from the bone and the fat rendered into the pan. Big Mama served it over rice with the rendered fat poured on top like gravy. There was no elegant way to eat it. You picked up the bone with your hands and worked around the cartilage with your teeth. The flavor sat in the marrow, and children who grew up eating backbone and rice can still tell you exactly how it tasted because nothing they have eaten since has come close to that particular richness. Number 17, tea cakes, a simple cookie made from butter, sugar, eggs, flour, vanilla, and a little nutmeg, mixed in a bowl with a wooden spoon and rolled out on a floured board. Big Mama cut the cakes with the rim of a drinking glass because she never owned a cookie cutter, and the glass left a clean, round edge that browned evenly in the oven. They were not decorated, they were not iced, they were not drizzled with anything or dusted with powdered sugar. They came out of the oven golden and soft, and by the time they cooled, they had a slight chew at the center and a dry crumb at the edge that no store-bought cookie in a plastic sleeve has ever matched. Tea cakes were the first thing children learned to bake in Big Mama's kitchen, standing on a chair to reach the counter, and they were the last thing that disappeared from most households when the woman who made them stopped baking and nobody thought to write down what she did with her hands. Number 16, turnip bottoms with the greens. The whole turnip, root, and leaves cooked together in one pot with a piece of smoked meat. Big Mama peeled the bottom and cut them into chunks, tore the greens off the stems, and put everything in at different times so nothing turned to mush before the rest caught up. Most people today buy turnip greens in a bag and throw the root away. Big Mama would have called that waste, and she would have been right. The root soaked up the potlikker and gave the greens something to sit on in the bowl, and the two together made a meal that neither one could make alone. Number 15, leftover biscuit bread pudding. Biscuits from the morning that nobody finished, torn into pieces, soaked in a mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla, and baked in a greased pan until the top went golden brown and the center set firm. Big Mama made this because throwing bread away was not something she did. It was not something any woman in her generation did. A biscuit was flour and lard and buttermilk, and all three of those cost something, and wasting them was the same as throwing coins in the yard. The biscuits held together better than regular bread in the custard, and the edges got crisp where they poked above the egg mixture in a way that store-bought bread pudding from a bakery case has never managed. She poured cane syrup over the top while it was still hot and served it warm in the same pan it baked in, because there was no reason to dirty a serving dish when the pan told the whole story. This was the dish that turned leftover dough into something people drove across town to eat. Not because it was fancy, it was never fancy, because it was the proof that nothing in Big Mama's kitchen ever went to waste. Not a biscuit, not a spoonful of milk, not the heat already in the oven from whatever she baked before it. A biscuit that went stale at breakfast was dessert by supper time, and the woman who made the transformation never once thought of it as clever. She thought of it as normal, the way breathing was normal, the way feeding people was normal. That was just what you did when you had mouths to feed and nothing to spare, and the children who ate it can still close their eyes and see the cane syrup pooling in the cracks of the golden top like it happened this morning. Number 14, fried catfish rolled in cornmeal. Whole catfish or fillets dipped in buttermilk, rolled in seasoned cornmeal, and fried in deep oil until the coating turned into a shell you could tap with a fork. Big Mama never used flour in her catfish batter. The cornmeal did the work and gave the fish a grit that flour could not. The fish came out of the oil and went onto newspaper to drain, and every plate had hot sauce on the side whether you asked for it or not. Number 13, streak of lean with white beans. A piece of streak of lean salt pork sliced thin, fried crisp in its own fat, and served alongside a pot of white beans that had been simmering all day with an onion and a bay leaf. The salt pork gave the beans their flavor and the meal its weight. Most butcher counters have stopped carrying streak of lean entirely, and the younger generation has never seen one. The people who knew what to do with that cut are getting older, and the knowledge is vanishing with them. Number 12, canned peach half with cottage cheese. A canned peach half placed cut side up on a plate with a scoop of cottage cheese sitting in the center where the pit used to be. Big Mama served this as a side dish at lunch, and on some days it was lunch. The sweetness of the peach syrup against the tang of the cottage cheese made something out of two ingredients that required no cooking at all and no time at the stove. It showed up on plates across the South from the 1940s through the 1970s, and then simply stopped appearing, as if everyone agreed at once that it was too plain to bother with. Number 11, fried apple hand pies. Dried apples soaked overnight, cooked down with sugar and cinnamon into a thick filling, then spooned onto rounds of biscuit dough, folded shut, crimped with a fork, and fried in oil until golden on both sides. Big Mama made a dozen at a time and wrapped them in wax paper. They traveled. That was the whole point of a hand pie. It could sit in a lunch pail or a coat pocket and still taste right hours later. Children carried them to school and ate them cold at recess, and nothing wrapped in cellophane from a gas station has ever come close to what came out of that skillet. The meals on this list did not disappear because people stopped wanting them. They disappeared because the women who made them measured nothing, timed nothing, and explained nothing while they worked. The kitchen was not a classroom, it was a workplace, and the work did not pause for questions. The only way to learn was to stand next to the stove and watch for years. And the generation that did not stand there long enough is the generation that lost the recipes. That is not a failure of memory. It is a failure of presence. And no YouTube video can undo it. Number 10, sawmill gravy over biscuits. Pork sausage crumbled and browned in a skillet until the fat rendered out. Then flour stirred into the drippings until the raw taste cooked off and the roux turned golden. Big Mama poured whole milk in slowly while she stirred with a wooden spoon, scraping the bottom of the pan to pull up every brown bit the sausage left behind, and the gravy thickened until it coated the back of the spoon and held there. She split 2 biscuits on a plate, poured the gravy over both halves until it ran down the sides and pooled on the plate, and set the whole thing down without ceremony or comment. The gravy was white and thick and peppered with crumbled bits of sausage throughout, and it was called sawmill gravy because the lumber camps across the South that fed it to workers every morning used the cheapest ingredients they could get their hands on, and the name stuck long after the camps shut down and the workers scattered to the cities. Number 9, crackling cornbread muffins. Pork cracklings folded into cornbread batter and baked in a cast iron muffin pan greased with lard. The cracklings rendered a second time inside the batter while it baked, leaving pockets of fat and crunch scattered through each muffin. Big Mama heated the pan in the oven before the batter went in, so the outside formed a crust the moment it hit the iron. These were not cornbread, and they were not muffins. They were something else entirely, heavier and richer and saltier, and nobody has named that thing properly since the women who made it stopped explaining. Number 8, pig feet in vinegar. Clean the pig feet simmered for hours in a heavy covered pot until the cartilage softened and the collagen turned the cooking liquid into a thick jelly when it cooled overnight. Big Mama packed them into mason jars with sliced onion, bay leaf, crushed red pepper, and white vinegar, pressed the lids down tight, and left them in the back of the refrigerator for 3 or 4 days before anyone in the house was allowed to open the jar. The waiting was not optional. She would move the jar to the back of the shelf where children could not reach it, and if somebody opened it early, she knew by the seal, and she had words about it. They were served cold, straight from the jar, and you ate them with your hands over a plate because there was no polite way to do it, and nobody in that kitchen pretended otherwise. This is the dish most kitchens pretended did not exist until the platter was empty. Nobody talked about making them at church. Nobody mentioned eating them at work the next day. But the jar emptied every single time it appeared on the table, and somebody in the house always had to make more, and that somebody was Big Mama, because nobody else had the patience for the process or the nerve to handle raw pig feet without flinching. The collagen set into the meat and gave it a texture that sat somewhere between tender and slippery, and the people who grew up eating pickled pig feet can describe that exact texture in their sleep 40 years later with their eyes closed. The vinegar cut through the richness, and the crushed red pepper gave it a slow burn that built over the course of 3 or 4 pieces until your lips tingled and your fingers were sticky and you reached for another one anyway because stopping was never the plan. Grocery stores still carry pig feet in most southern cities today, but the women who knew how to pickle them properly, who knew how long to simmer and how much vinegar and how many days to wait and which pepper to crush, are thinning out year by year, and the jars in the back of the refrigerator are disappearing with them. Number 7, stewed chicken and flat dumplings. A whole chicken simmered in salted water until the meat fell off the bone, then flat strips of dough dropped into the broth one at a time. Big Mama rolled the dough thin on a floured counter and cut it into strips with a knife, not a biscuit cutter. The dumplings were chewy and dense, not fluffy. They sat in the broth and soaked up everything the chicken had released. This was a sick day meal and a cold day meal and a day after church meal, and the pot lasted 2 days if she stretched it with more water and a handful of extra dumplings. Number 6, poke salad. Young pokeweed, shoots gathered in the spring before the stems turn red, boiled in 3 changes of water to draw out the toxin, then drained and fried in bacon grease with onion and scrambled eggs, stirred in at the end. Big Mama knew exactly when to pick it and exactly how many boils it needed before the plant was safe. Pick it too late in the season and the leaves could make you sick enough to need a doctor. She never explained the timing. She just knew, the way she knew everything else in that kitchen. Pokeweed still grows wild across the South today, but the number of people who know how to prepare it safely drops every year. Number 5, lace cornbread. Cornmeal batter thinned with water until it was almost liquid, then poured into a hot, greased skillet in thin streams that spread and connected into a lacy web with crisp edges and holes where the grease bubbled through. Big Mama flipped it once with a spatula and served it alongside whatever pot was on the stove that night. It crunched like a cracker and tasted like corn and salt and hot grease. This was cornbread for the nights when the cornmeal was running low and had to stretch further than a full skillet would allow. Number 4, butter roll. Biscuit dough rolled out flat, spread with soft butter, sugar, and cinnamon, rolled into a tight log, sliced into rounds, placed in a baking pan, and baked with a sweet milk and sugar sauce poured around them. Big Mama made this when she had biscuit dough left over and a sweet tooth in the house to answer for. The sauce bubbled up around the rolls and turned into a thin caramel on the bottom of the pan by the time it came out of the oven. Most modern bakeries have never heard of a butter roll, and yet it sat on tables across the Deep South for decades without anyone thinking to write it down. Number 3, white rice under pan drippings. Plain white rice with the pan drippings from whatever meat was cooked that night, thickened with a spoonful of flour and poured over the top. In most of Big Mama's suppers, the rice was the meal and the meat was the side. A pork chop made one kind of dripping. A piece of chicken made another. A pot roast made a third. The rice never changed, but the gravy told you everything about what happened in that kitchen that day. Every child raised on that plate knows there is no replacement for drippings from a real pan because they have tried the store-bought kind and walked away from the table disappointed. Number 2, pot of pinto beans with chow chow. Pinto beans soaked overnight, cooked all day with a ham bone, and served in a deep bowl with a spoonful of homemade chow chow on the side. Big Mama made the chow chow at the end of every summer from green tomatoes, cabbage, onions, and hot peppers, cooked down in vinegar and sugar and sealed in jars that she kept on a shelf in the back of the pantry. The sweet, sour bite of the chow chow cut through the heaviness of the beans and made the bowl feel like a full meal that needed nothing else on the table. She made enough jars to last until the next summer, and they lined the pantry shelf like a calendar, counting down the months until the garden came back. Number 1, Sunday, fried chicken. This is the dish that sat at the center of everything. Big Mama seasoned the chicken the night before and let it rest in the refrigerator until morning. She dredged it in flour with salt, pepper, paprika, and garlic powder and fried it in a cast iron skillet in oil deep enough to come halfway up the piece. She turned each piece once. She never checked the thermometer. She knew it was ready by the sound. The chicken came out of the oil and went onto a brown paper bag to drain, and the plate was ready when she said it was ready. Every neighbor on the block knew whose fried chicken was the best, and none of them could explain exactly why. The difference was not in the recipe, the difference was Big Mama. Tomato gravy was what happened when there was no meat for drippings and no milk for white gravy, but there was always a can of tomatoes and bacon grease in the jar by the stove. You started with the fat, let it get hot, worked in a spoonful of flour, and stirred until the raw smell cooked off. The canned tomatoes went in next, crushed by hand over the pan, and the whole thing simmered down into something thick and rust-colored, seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. It went over biscuits, over rice, over whatever bread was on the table. Through the Depression years and the lean stretches of the 1940s, this meal cost pennies per serving and appeared on Black Southern tables with the reliability of sunrise. It wasn't company food, it was Tuesday. And yet, people today who try to recreate it exactly, same can of tomatoes, same grease, same flour, find something still comes out wrong. The flavor lived in the hands that made it and in the unhurried pace of the stirring, in the way she never rushed a roux because she had nowhere else to be. But years before that dish reached any holiday table, something simpler had been feeding families every weeknight. Number 21, smothered veal chops. Veal was not a luxury in the 1950s. It was what butchers had too much of, especially near the meatpacking district. Harlem lunch counter cooks bought the chops cheap, browned them hard in cast iron, then buried them under heavy onion gravy and let them cook low for an hour. The meat came out so tender, it barely held to the bone. The gravy turned a plate of plain rice into a full meal. This was one of the more popular weekday plates, especially along 7th Avenue. By the 1980s, veal prices had risen sharply. Animal welfare campaigns made the meat controversial, and the counters that still existed quietly dropped it. Smothered veal chops never made the transition to modern soul food restaurants. The dish simply stopped. Number 24, Banquet Salisbury, steak TV dinner. 99 cents at the Save-A-Lot, 6 minutes in the microwave, and the foil tray steamed up the kitchen for 10 seconds when you peeled the plastic back. A brown dish of pressed beef and mushroom gravy, a square of mashed potatoes that came out gray, corn kernels in one corner, a brownie in the other, and the whole thing eaten in front of the little kitchen TV with the bent antenna. In a lot of Black households in the 90s, the Banquet Salisbury was what dinner looked like on the nights Mama worked a double. It was not a celebration plate, it was a placeholder plate that did its job. The brownie was always the part you saved for last. Through the 1940s and 50s, a pound of navy beans or pintos could feed a large family for pennies and sit in the pantry through any emergency. The fatback went in with the soaked beans, not as something to eat, but as a seasoning, a thick slab of salt-cured pork fat that dissolved slowly into the broth over hours, releasing a smoky richness that made the beans taste far more complex than beans and water alone. In many Black Southern households, this pot went on the stove early in the morning and didn't come off until supper. You stirred it when you passed. You added water when the level dropped. No timers, No thermometers, just attention and rhythm that could happen while other work was being done. The beans swelled and softened until the broth thickened naturally around them. The fat back gave body to every spoonful, and the beans gave protein and starch enough to quiet any hunger at the table. Built from almost nothing, it tasted like everything. Number 24, creamed codfish on toast. Salt cod crossed the Atlantic with the slave trade, and it never left the black kitchen. In Harlem, lunch counter cooks soaked dried codfish overnight, pulled it apart by hand, and folded it into a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and whole milk. They spooned it over toast cut corner to corner. The dish was filling, cheap, and gentle enough for a customer with bad teeth. By the 1950s, nearly every steam table counter on Lenox Avenue had a version. It required patience, hours of soaking to draw out the salt, constant stirring so the sauce did not seize. When the counters closed, nobody picked it up. Fast food had no version of it. Diners had no interest. Creamed codfish on toast vanished from the American plate, and most people born after 1975 have never heard of it. Number 28, hamburger helper cheeseburger macaroni. The box hit the shelf in the early 70s, but the 90s was when it lived on the dinner table. A pound of ground chuck, browned and drained. One box, 1.5 cups of water, 2 cups of milk, and 12 minutes on the stove. The helping hand mascot smiled from the box while working parents stretched a $5 dinner across 4 kids and a husband working second shift. Cheeseburger macaroni was the flavor everyone in the house actually agreed on. The yellow-orange sauce was sharp and salty and a little bit synthetic in a way that 90s kids learned to love. Beef stroganoff and lasagna sat next to it in the pantry, but cheeseburger was the one that ran out first. Mothers added a can of Rotel for heat or a handful of frozen peas for color and called it dinner. Nobody apologized for it. The leftover pot in the fridge was breakfast for whoever woke up first, eaten cold with a fork right out of the saucepan. Number 27, fried whiting with grits. The bean pie didn't come from a Southern grandmother's kitchen. It came from something more deliberate. The Nation of Islam introduced it in the 1930s as a direct alternative to sweet potato pie, part of a broader push to shift African American eating habits toward foods the organization considered nutritious and self-sufficient. Navy beans were cooked down, sweetened, seasoned with nutmeg, cinnamon, and vanilla, and baked into a custard that tasted nothing like its name suggested. Smooth, faintly spiced, richer than anything made from dry beans had any right to be. By the 1950s and 60s, NOI mosques in Detroit, Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles were selling bean pies from street tables out of the hands of young men in bow ties who moved through black neighborhoods as both vendors and community. If you grew up near a mosque or in a household the NOI had touched, you knew exactly what it was. If you hadn't, you might have gone your whole life never tasting one. The gap was deliberate. The pie belonged to the community that made it. Number 20, braised pig knuckles. In the old Harlem counters, pig knuckles sat in a deep pan on the steam table, braised until the skin turned translucent and the collagen melted into the cooking liquid. The knuckle carries almost no lean meat. What it has is fat, tendon, cartilage, and skin, all of which break down over hours into something rich and sticky. Eating one was not delicate. You picked it up with both hands and worked around the bone. The broth soaked into whatever starch sat beside it, usually rice or white bread. A plate cost almost nothing because the cut had no market value outside of Black and German neighborhoods. When the counters closed, the knuckle lost its last public stage. The braised steam table version that fed Harlem for decades is gone. Here's something worth saying before this list goes further. The Harlem lunch counter was never just a place to eat. It was a hiring hall, a message board, a bank. Women who ran those kitchens extended credit to customers they trusted. A man between jobs could eat for a week on a handshake. A mother could send her child in with a note and know the plate would be right. These counters ran on reputation, and reputation ran on food. When urban renewal tore through Harlem in the 1950s and 1960s, it did not just demolish buildings, it broke networks. A counter that closed on 125th Street took with it 30 years of relationships, recipes that existed only in one woman's memory, and a credit system no bank would ever replace. What follows are the dishes those kitchens served. Each one carried more than calories. Friday night fish fry in a small kitchen, the apartment smelling like cornmeal and hot oil from 3 doors down. Whiting was the cheapest whole fish at the seafood counter, about $1.90 a pound, sold frozen in flat blue boxes. The fillets got soaked in yellow mustard, dredged in Laurie's seasoned cornmeal, and dropped into hot peanut oil until the edges curled. They went on the plate next to a mound of stone ground grits, a wedge of lemon, and 2 slices of light bread to make a sandwich if the spirit moved you. Friday night was payday night, and the smell of frying whiting traveled through every hallway in the building. Number 26, hot wings with blue cheese. The 90s were when the corner wing spot became its own kind of church. 10 wings, dipped in Frank's Red Hot and melted margarine, shaken in a styrofoam clamshell with a slick of ranch or blue cheese in the corner. $5.99 got you the combo with fries and a grape soda. The chicken and wing shop boom of the early 90s put a hot wing counter on what felt like every other block in Detroit and Atlanta and Cleveland. Friday after work, Saturday after the game, Sunday after church if your mother let you. The blue cheese came in a little plastic cup with a foil lid, and serious eaters used it for the celery only. The fries soaked up the wing grease at the bottom of the box, and that was always the best bite. The Potlikker was never the leftover, it was the whole point. After a mess of greens simmered for hours with a ham bone or salt pork, what remained was a dark, potent broth, tangy with vinegar and rich with pork fat, carrying every mineral the greens had surrendered to the water. George Key, born enslaved in Arkansas, described meals of greens and Potlikker as daily sustenance, and that tradition carried forward unbroken for more than a century. You tore off a piece of cornbread and dropped it in, or you tipped the pot and drank from a cup. Some households saved their Potlikker like stock poured into jars. For the week, stirred into dry beans, used to start the next pot of greens. The broth served as a healing remedy too, given to sick children when solid food felt like too much. What wealthier kitchens threw away, these households turned into medicine and into the richest thing on the table. The can of pink salmon cost next to nothing, and it came with every bit of the fish, including the soft, edible bones that Grandma mashed right in because those bones were calcium and she wasn't throwing calcium away. The salmon got flaked into a bowl, mixed with cornmeal, a beaten egg, chopped onion, and black pepper, then shaped into patties with wet hands and laid into a skillet of hot grease. Cornmeal served as binding and crust at once, holding the patties together while crisping them gold on both sides. By the 1940s and 50s, canned salmon had become a staple protein in Black Southern households because it was affordable, shelf-stable, and asked nothing of you in terms of equipment. A single can fed 4 people with enough cornmeal to stretch it. What came out of that skillet had a crispy shell and a tender center, and it sat well on rice or beside dried beans. The recipe still exists. The woman who made it by feel, pressing each patty until it held without asking how, does not. Number 23, beef tongue sandwich. The tongue came in whole, boiled until tender, peeled, sliced thin, and laid across rye bread with mustard and a pickle spear. Jewish delis on the Lower East Side made it famous, but Harlem counters served their own version, seasoned differently, often with hot sauce and a slice of raw onion. It was a working man's meal. The texture sat between roast beef and corned beef, and the flavor was richer than both. A tongue sandwich at a Harlem counter in the 1950s cost about 30 cents. The dish held through the 1970s, but as the counters disappeared, so did the cooks who knew how to handle the cut. Today, whole beef tongue is still available at butcher shops, but almost no restaurant in Harlem or anywhere else serves it on bread. Number 25, Sunday smothered chicken and rice. This is the smell that made the whole apartment building know what day it was. A whole cut-up fryer, bone in, browned in a heavy skillet until the skin went the color of pecan. The bird came out, the flour went in, and the roux turned slow under a wooden spoon. Onions and bell pepper followed, a little garlic if grandma trusted you with the jar, and then chicken stock from the kettle that had been simmering on the back burner since service let out at noon. The chicken pieces went back in, the lid went on, and the smothering began. An hour, sometimes 90 minutes, while everyone changed out of their church clothes and the long grain rice came up to a boil in a separate pot. The gravy got thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. The kitchen windows fogged. The plastic on the good couch in the living room squeaked every time somebody walked past with a hungry look. The sound of a Sunday smothered chicken was a low and steady simmer that you could hear from the front door. The sound of the lid coming off was the sound that called everyone to the table. 2 scoops of rice, 2 pieces of chicken with the dark meat going to whoever had been the most polite that week, and a long pour of gravy over the whole plate. Cornbread on the side, sweet tea in the jelly jar glass, and a paper towel folded into a napkin because the cloth ones were saved for company. This was the meal that taught a whole generation what unhurried tasted like. The detail no one mentions is the second plate, the one wrapped in foil and put on the back of the stove for the family member who got off work at 6. It was always still warm when they walked in. Number 25, beef short rib stew. Before a Harlem lunch counter opened for the day, a pot of short ribs had already been simmering for hours in the back. The cut was cheap because butchers considered it waste. Too much bone, too much gristle, not enough clean meat for a proper roast. But slow heat turned all of that into something dark and rich, falling off the bone into a broth thick enough to hold a spoon upright. A plate with white rice and cornbread cost less than $1 through the early 1960s. The women running those kitchens bought ribs by the case. Today, beef short ribs sell for $9 or $10 a pound. The cut that built lunch counter Harlem is now a luxury item on restaurant menus, charging $40 a plate. The stew is gone. Number 22, smothered neck bones with lima beans. This was the dish every working mother stretched into 3 meals. 5 pounds of pork neck bones, about $1.19 a pound at the meat counter, simmered low for 3 hours with an onion, 2 bay leaves, and enough water to cover. The first meal was the neck bones themselves over rice with the lima beans on the side. The second meal was the broth poured over cornbread for lunch the next day. The third meal was whatever meat was left, picked clean off the bones, folded into a pot of greens on Wednesday. 1 pot of neck bones fed a family from Sunday supper to Tuesday lunch. 90s grocery budgets did not have room for waste, and nobody on the block treated a neck bone like an afterthought. Number 22, rice pudding. Not the boxed kind, not the cold cup from a deli case. Harlem lunch counter. Rice pudding was baked in deep hotel pans with whole milk, eggs, sugar, vanilla, and a heavy hand of nutmeg on top. It came out of the oven with a golden skin that cracked when the spoon broke through. Every counter had it, usually in the glass case near the register, where customers could see it before they ordered. It was the cheapest dessert in the building, and it moved faster than anything else after 3 in the afternoon. School children bought it. Night shift workers took it home in wax paper cups. The homemade version disappeared when the counters closed, replaced by factory cups with a shelf life measured in months. Stewed tomatoes spooned over plain white rice, made with whatever was in season or whatever was in the can. The tomatoes cooked down in a little fat with onion, salt, and black pepper until they lost their shape and became a thick, warm sauce. Poured over white rice, a small amount of flavor stretched across a large amount of food. In the rural South, this meal appeared when the week ran thin, cheap, fast, deeply filling, built from pantry staples that never ran out. The smell was sharp and sweet at once, the kind that settled into the walls of a kitchen. In the 1950s and 60s, as families moved north during the Great Migration, this meal traveled with them. Same tomatoes, same rice, same economy, and it showed up on Chicago and Detroit stovetops without missing a step. Number 23, now and laters, from the corner store. A dime got you a long pink and yellow brick of cherry and banana that broke your back teeth before it softened up enough to chew. The corner store in the 90s had a glass counter at kid eye level, and that whole counter was candy. Now, and laters next to lemon heads, next to Boston baked beans, next to a tray of Mary Janes that had been there since the Reagan administration. After school, a quarter went a long way. 10 cents for the candy, 15 cents for a frozen Huggy in the back freezer, and the rest of the walk home was spent biting and chewing and trying to make a brick of cherry last the 8 blocks. Nobody's mother knew exactly what was in a now and later. Nobody asked. The wrapper was the receipt, and the receipt was folded into the back pocket of jeans that came home from school every day with a sugary square in the corner. The green tomatoes came off the vine when frost was close enough that waiting for them to ripen was no longer an option. Every garden had them, tomatoes that grew fat and firm but never turned red, and throwing them away was never considered. They got sliced thick, salted to draw out the water, then dredged in seasoned cornmeal and laid into hot grease. The cornmeal had to be coarse enough to hold and form a proper crust. Fine meal slid off and burned. The fat had to come halfway up each slice, and the heat had to be steady, too high, and the coating brown before the tomato softened beneath it. The finished slice was crisp outside and yielding in the middle, tangy and slightly bitter in a way ripe tomatoes never are. Most people who've eaten this have had a version, but not the version made from a tomato pulled an hour before it hit the skillet. That freshness changes everything. Dried beans were never the backup plan. They were the plan. Number 21, BBQ rib. Tips in a styrofoam box. The Chicago rib tip in the 90s was a whole genre, sold from walk-up windows with bulletproof glass and a turnstile of pre-folded boxes behind the counter. Tips with a cartilaginous end of the spare rib, the part butchers used to throw away, smoked over hickory in a converted oil drum until the fat rendered and the meat pulled clean. A $6.95 small order came with 2 slices of white bread, a scoop of slaw, and a flood of sauce that turned the bread red and then orange and then translucent at the corners. People ate them on the hood of the car in the parking lot while the smoke was still rising off the box. The bones got piled up on the dashboard because nobody wanted to put a greasy hand back on the steering wheel until the eating was done. 30 dishes, and not a single measuring cup touched any of them. Big Mama cooked from a place that no book can reach and no video can replicate. The measurements lived in her hands. The timing lived in her ears. The taste lived in the memory of every person who ever pulled a chair up to her table. If your family still makes even one dish the way she made it, hold onto that. It means somebody was paying attention. Drop the dish your family kept alive in the comments. It deserves to be named out loud.